Imagine this: a busy airport terminal, passengers hustling to board their flights. Among them is a powerful black billionaire woman, poised and confident, ready to take the world by storm. But then, out of nowhere, a pilot confronts her with an attitude dripping with prejudice. Words are exchanged, and suddenly, he does the unthinkable. He slaps her. The crowd freezes. Shock ripples through the air as people can't believe what they've just witnessed. But this isn't where her story ends. Just 5 minutes later, she delivers a lesson in justice that leaves everyone speechless. Her calm but fierce response flips the situation on its head, proving once again that strength and dignity can triumph over ignorance. What happens next will leave you questioning everything about standing up for what's right. Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss how she turns this moment into something unforgettable. The woman, let's call her Maya, had spent years building her empire. She wasn't just wealthy. She was a force in the business world, admired by some, feared by others. That day, she had just closed an important deal and was headed home to spend time with her family. As she walked towards the boarding gate, she was already lost in thoughts of the future. But then came the pilot. His condescending tone, his dismissive attitude, he didn't seem to care about who she was or what she had accomplished. Maya had dealt with racism in subtle ways throughout her life, but this blatant disrespect caught her off guard. It was a slap, but it wasn't just physical. It was a challenge to her worth, an attempt to remind her of her place. As the tension hung thick in the air, Maya didn't immediately react. She simply stared at the pilot, her eyes cold, calculating. Everyone watched in silence, waiting for her next move. What could she possibly do next? The air was thick with the weight of what had just happened. Maya stood there, her hand slightly raised to where the slap had stung, her face unreadable. The pilot, for a moment, seemed to realize what he had done, his eyes darting around the terminal as if hoping someone would come to his defense. But no one did. Instead, murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, their gazes fixed on Maya. From the corner of the room, a few of Maya's business associates exchanged nervous glances. They had seen her handle countless high-stakes negotiations, but this was different. They had never seen her so still, so quiet, as if she was calculating every moment, every word. Meanwhile, the pilot was oblivious to the storm he had stirred. He was used to being in control, used to people submitting to his authority, but this time he had underestimated Maya. In the distance, a security officer stepped forward, uncertain whether he should intervene or wait for instructions. Maya, however, didn't budge. She took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of her bag as if nothing had happened. To those around her, it seemed like she was letting the moment pass, but her expression told a different story. Something was brewing beneath the surface. The pilot, perhaps sensing the tension, tried to offer a weak apology, his words fumbling. But Maya didn't respond. Her silence was deafening. She simply turned her back on him and walked toward a nearby bench, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The crowd's whispers grew louder, but Maya was already in her own world, her mind racing through options. She could call security. She could file a complaint, but those wouldn't be enough. She needed to show him, to show everyone, that this kind of behavior, this blatant racism, couldn't go unchallenged. As she sat, the pilot's frustration turned to anger. He paced back and forth, his face flushed. He wasn't used to being ignored. He thought he could just walk away from this, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized Maya had the power to make him pay in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. He was no longer just a pilot. He was a man who had crossed a line, and the consequences were starting to take shape. Maya, still sitting there, felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't just thinking about this moment. She was thinking about every moment that had led up to this. Every time someone had underestimated her, every time someone had tried to put her in her place. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making a statement, a lesson that would echo far beyond the walls of this airport. Maya's heart raced, but her face remained calm, controlled. As she sat on that bench, People around her were starting to gather. Some pulled out their phones, likely recording the incident, while others watched in stunned silence, sensing something big was about to unfold. The tension was palpable. The pilot was pacing now, his anger bubbling to the surface. His voice was rising, barely contained as he muttered to himself, clearly irritated by Maya's lack of response. He didn't know her, not really. He couldn't see beyond his own narrow perspective. And that's when he made the mistake of stepping forward, closing the distance between them. His voice, now louder, demanded her attention. "Why aren't you saying anything?" he snapped. "I know who you are. You're nothing without money. Just another entitled rich person." Maya's eyes slowly met his, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. There was no hint of fear in her gaze, only something sharper, something colder. The bystanders were starting to feel the weight of her presence, as if the room itself had grown heavier. She stood up, slow and deliberate. The noise of the terminal seemed to fade as all eyes turned to her. The pilot stood frozen, caught between anger and confusion. What was she going to do next? Maya didn't immediately speak. Instead, she walked toward him, closing the gap, her every step echoing in the silence. The crowd held their breath. People began whispering. What would she say? Would she call for help? Was this it? She stopped just a few feet from him. The pilot was tense, his fists clenching. He wasn't sure if he was more afraid of what she might do or how she might humiliate him. Then, with a calm voice that cut through the air, Maya spoke, her words so quiet yet so powerful. "You think money defines me?" she asked, her tone laced with quiet intensity. "You think your words have any power over me? Let me show you what true strength looks like." The room was still. No one moved. No one spoke. At that moment, something in the air shifted. A sense of anticipation hung over the crowd. Maya had taken control of the situation, but what she did next would determine everything. The power was in her hands now, and every pair of eyes was glued to her. They all waited, breathlessly. The tension in the air was electric, and the crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the next move. Maya took a steadying breath, her eyes never leaving the suited figure. The pilot stood frozen, his anger replaced by confusion, but Maya was calm. She was ready for this, whatever it was. The suited man glanced at her one last time, then turned to the pilot with a look that could freeze anyone in their tracks. "Captain, I suggest you leave now," the man said, his voice ice cold. "This situation is being handled." The pilot stammered, glancing from the man to Maya. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the shift in power. He had thought he could intimidate her, but this was something different, something he couldn't control. Slowly he backed away, his pride bruised, his mind swirling. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. Maya's gaze followed him, her mind clearing. The suited man didn't move. He wasn't here for an apology, he wasn't here for her either. His eyes locked with hers once more, and for a moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the room. "You don't know who I am, do you?" he asked, his voice quiet, yet somehow carrying a weight that made the air feel thick with expectation. Maya raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued but cautious. "Should I?" He smiled faintly, his expression revealing nothing. "You're not just a businesswoman, Miss Bellamy. You're the woman who single-handedly exposed a multi-million-dollar scandal involving a high-profile airline, a very specific airline." Maya's blood ran cold. She had heard whispers of a company tied to questionable practices, but she hadn't connected the dots until now. This was bigger than just a racist pilot. This was personal. The airport, the security team, the strange officials, they were all connected to a scandal she had inadvertently been part of. And the pilot's outburst. It was a desperate attempt to silence her before she could speak up again. "Your actions have consequences," the suited man continued, his tone colder now. "We've been keeping an eye on you for months. You've been poking at the wrong people." Maya's heart beat faster, but she didn't flinch. The man wasn't threatening her, he was giving her a warning. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't just about the slap or the racist remarks. This was a fight that had been simmering beneath the surface for far longer than she had realized. But before she could respond, the final twist of the day came. A voice echoed through the terminal, loud and clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Maya Bellamy," called a new voice, familiar but distant, "you're under arrest for the theft of confidential documents." Everyone froze. The suited man's expression faltered for just a split second. Another officer, this time in a different uniform, stepped into the room. Maya's eyes widened. She recognized the officer. It was someone from her past, someone she trusted. "Maya, I didn't want it to come to this.